In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war.
In Space Marine, you play as Titus, captain of a company of Ultramarines from the Imperium of Man that kills space orcs like it's going out of style. I'm realizing now this might sound like crazy talk to people who are uninitiated. If you clicked on this video, I'm generally assuming you know what the Warhammer universe is all about, but if not, let me see if I can bring you up to speed real quick. It's the 42nd millennium and mankind has spread across the stars. However, space is full of horrifying aliens, robot mummies, and actual hell.
Stuff of chaos, heresy!
So the humans have gotten to be a little bit, fascist. The Imperium of Man are not good guys, but they are your best option if you're a human and you like wearing your skin. The Imperium builds giant spaceships that are half Star Destroyer and half Catholic Church, and the Space Marines are giant, genetically modified religious zealots that wear about a Honda Civic's worth of metal to fight space elves, space orcs, and the devil. That should be all the basics for you to understand why the Warhammer franchise is so appealing to giant nerds. This game was released back in 2011, so it's showing some wrinkles with its age. Even back then, it wasn't exactly AAA, but it is probably one of the best shooters to come out of a setting that has surprisingly few of them. The only other Warhammer shooters I can think of are Space Hulk and Hired Gun. No, not you. You get the hell. It was released the same year as Skyrim and some actual good games, so it's easy to see how it flew under the radar for most people. Though I can't exactly blame anybody who picked up the box and looked at the cover art and just thought this looked ridiculous. I think Warhammer is a lot more widely known today, or maybe I've just been hanging around too many nerds, but Sega seemed to see the appeal as they surprised everyone with the announcement of a sequel recently. I remembered this game pretty fondly and thought now would be as good a time as any to revisit it and see if it holds up. Also, just as a quick note, if I sound a little rough this episode, it's because I've been feeling pretty sick lately. I'm trying my best over here. Please subscribe. Once we start up a new game, we're greeted with, what is this? This is a strange intro scene where the main plot hook is displayed on a computer screen? I don't know. This intro is kind of a bad first impression. It doesn't fit the rest of the game at all, and it makes it look like it didn't have a budget. I think there must have been some testers that complained about not knowing what planet they were on or why it wasn't just nuked from orbit, but those questions are answered by the rest of the game. I don't know why this is here. I think the game would have been much better served by not having it at all. I'm sorry to spend so much time on this little part, but it's just the very first thing new players are going to see, and it's so clearly something that was added at the last minute. Luckily, after this, we have a much better opening scene where we're introduced to our cast. You have Titus, the captain you'll be controlling for this adventure, his old, wise, I'm only a week out from retirement squadmate Sidonus, and the by-the-books rookie, Leandros.
Heresy!
It's weird to see this almost buddy cop dynamic with Space Marines, but it's simple enough and it works here. Sidonus is mostly agreeable with Titus, and it's pretty obvious that they've been space bros for some time. Leandros is obviously a newer recruit who gets upset with Titus not following the Codex Astartes to the letter, while Titus encourages him to think for himself, as that is the true test of a Space Marine. They're being sent to this planet called Graia. Graia is a horrible factory world. The Imperium has hundreds or thousands of these. If you live on an Imperium factory world, everything is concrete and metal, the air is smog, and your life is miserable. The boys here have to save the Titan factories. Titans are basically skyscraper-sized walking tanks with more guns than a Deep South church. The Imperium has deemed this planet too valuable to lose because this is where they make their Gundams, and they'd rather the orcs not get their hands on those. While the rest of the fleet is too far out, it's up to Titus and his boys to take out the trash. Now visually, the game holds up pretty well for being a decade old, and I think that's mainly due to the art direction. See, Games Workshop has a tight grip on their intellectual properties, perhaps a little too tight. But one benefit of that is uniform representation. You see a Warhammer Orc or a Space Marine, you know what it is immediately, no matter where you see it. All the character models here look exactly like you would expect them to, down to representing a bunch of different tabletop models. Each of the enemy's types are all visually distinct, so you never really get confused as to what you're fighting unless there are far too many to keep track of. If I had to complain about anything with the character design, it would be that Titus looks a little too pretty to be a Space Marine. It's like somebody took the head off a Ken doll and popped it onto their Ultramarine. My only other complaint about the art direction in general would be the drab, muted colors everywhere. Editing this video now, I'm seeing so much brown and gray. It kind of makes sense though, because, as I said before, Graia is a factory world, so while it would be nice to see some trees or something, trees don't build tanks, so they got rid of all those. Space Marine is also a shooter that came out in the early 2010s, and we hated color back then. But I guess that works for the grimdark 40k universe. On a technical level, things are pretty standard for the time. The game starts right up on newer hardware, but it does start by default in a really weird resolution. I don't know what this is, I've never seen this before. Other than that, there are no problems, technically, that you need to get over before you can enjoy the game. There are a few standout set pieces here and there. For example, when you finally do reach the Titan later on in the game, it's actually fully modeled, and that thing is huge. We'll get back to that. On one stage, you are attempting to stop the orcs from using one of the trains as a battering ram. This stage slaps, by the way. There's another stage a little later on as you're going through these misty sewers, and the limited visibility means those little exploding enemies are extra terrifying here. I swear these little exploding pig sounds are going to be seared into my nightmares. Speaking of sounds, the work done on the audio here is pretty good. Most Warhammer 40k properties have uniformly fantastic voice acting, and there's no exception here. The orcs have that trademark brutish cockney, and the main cast does a great job of carrying that no-nonsense stoic tone that the Space Marines are known for.
Worry not, Captain. I've saved some orcs for you.
There is a bit of an issue with mixing sometimes, however, especially with the collectible audio logs that are strewn throughout the game. Some of these recordings sound like I'm listening to them through a wall.
Personal message cache. Guardsman Alexander. Tonight was a good day. Clearing a family of orcs. Heard a banging from inside the furnace.
What?
It's a good thing I didn't throw a grenade inside.
What? Sometimes it's pretty hard to hear over the music.
Are you wounded?
The Codex Astartes warns against using jump packs to leap blindly into enemy fire, and for good reason.
Your days as a novice are behind you.
Speaking of the music, it's fantastic. The soundtrack would be a great addition to anyone's tabletop RPG night. I can't help but feel like it sounds like an Avenger movie in some places though, which is kind of tonally dissonant. I don't know, man, it just doesn't seem to mix. Space Marine is a hack-and-slash third-person shooter combo meal, and it manages to blend the two fairly well. The weaker side is certainly the melee combat, which is unfortunate because you're forced into it pretty often. Until the end of the game, but I'll have to talk about that past the spoiler warning. The orcs fight like orcs, which means they mostly swarm you with a ton of weak melee boys while supplementing those with ranged units. To combat the horde, you have to collect a wide variety of weapons which are introduced to you at a pretty good pace. I feel like I was finding new weapons right up until the end of the game. You start off with a bolter pistol and a combat knife, which are about as good at killing orcs as the Imperial Guard, which is to say, not great. You quickly pick up a chainsword, and then a combat knife is never seen again. As far as melee weapons go, you can also pick up a power axe and a thunder hammer. The power axe is just a straight upgrade to the chainsword, and the thunder hammer explodes anything you hit with it. However, the thunder hammer comes at the downside of locking you out of two of your ranged weapons. For ranged weapons, of course, you get the bolter, which sounds pretty good here. a must for any Warhammer game. You also have an expanding menu of large ranged weapons from melt-a-guns to plasma launchers, heavy bolters, and more. I don't want to go into depth on each and every weapon here, but all of them have specific use cases, and I think it was a nice touch that right after each weapon is introduced to you, you are then placed into an encounter in which that weapon excels. Laser cannons can one-shot most enemies at a long range, the Vengeance Launcher can place traps and hit groups, and the Melt-A-Gun deletes motherfuckers. Each of these weapons comes paired with some great sound design too. I particularly like the cooldown sound the laser cannon gives. It helps you have an audio cue to let you know when the weapon's ready to fire again. Most of the weapons actually have subtle audio cues to let you know when you're running out of ammo, which is great because these battles can get hectic and I'm not going to be looking at this, so it's nice to have that extra layer of feedback. While fighting orcs, you'll mostly be using melee and you'll have to shoot the occasional ranged unit. Occasionally they'll switch it up though and it'll be a more ranged-based encounter. See, for most of the game, you are doing the same minute-long loop that involves going to a new room and killing all the enemies in it, rinsing and repeating. The trick is how they vary these encounters and environments up just enough to make you feel like you're doing something new. I'd say my biggest problem with the game would be that there's only so many different ways you can mix up 10 variety of orc and level layouts before I start getting a sense of deja vu. See, the game is fairly linear. There's no progression systems or crafting or any of that pansy stuff, just raw, glorious combat. But that does start to wear thin after a while. They do find ways to make it more entertaining later on, but again, that'll be spoiler territory, so I'll talk about that here in a little bit. My other biggest gripe is how this combat system handles healing. See, in Melee, you have a dedicated button to stun an opponent, which can then be followed up with an execution, which can gain you back some lost health. This is fine, in theory. Doom does it great. But the big drawback is that you are still vulnerable to damage during this animation, and some of these animations can take ages. Chill it with the theatrics, Titus! Just decapitate this son of a bitch! The bigger problem here is that as the game moves on, the times you need to heal the most will frequently be when you're under fire, and if you're starting to see a problem here, don't worry, you're not crazy. Thankfully, there is another mechanic to offset this. As you deal damage to enemies, you gain Fury. Once your Fury meter is full, you can trigger it for increased melee damage, bullet time while aiming, and passive regeneration to your health. You cannot be shy about using this, as it will be your only way to heal in some encounters. You have to also be smart about when you use it though, because not having it at the right time can mean certain death. I'd say the Fury mechanic is probably the core system glue holding the rest of the mechanics together. I don't think this combat system would work quite as well without the Fury system, and it does a lot of legwork here in making the game feel fun. So with all the presentation and gameplay out of the way, I guess the only thing left to talk about is the story. And as far as stories go, this is certainly one of them. The story here is that Titus and his other Ultramarines were sent to save this planet's factories. They make Titans here, and those are pretty important to the Imperial war machine. The Marines are actually surprised to find some Imperial guards still alive here because they just assumed they were all dead by now, and yeah, I can't really blame them. The Imperial Guard are basically a free appetizer tray to an invading Orc Horde. Before you manage to get to the factory, you get a message from an Inquisitor who is trying to retrieve some super secret tech before the Orcs grab it. His message makes it seem like he's about to be killed, so you hurry to rescue him. It turns out he's wounded, but fine. And the tech that he was trying to recover is an experimental warp battery that the Orcs could use to, well, blow up the entire planet. You go to retrieve the battery, but the Orc war boss shows up and figures that if the Space Marines want something, he wants it first. The Inquisitor explains that there is a psychic superweapon in his laboratory that can kill all the Orcs on the planet without killing any humans. The Space Marines hate the idea of using this warp battery, but After a couple million more orcs show up, they decide they're out of options, and agree to help fire his pet project. You fight through the labs, which is, funnily enough, a reverse turret section. You finally get the super secret psychic mega weapon online, and this is where I have to give a big fat spoiler warning for anyone unfamiliar with Warhammer lore, and will get upset if I don't tell you up front, so please skip to the timecode below if you want to go into this blind.
It shouldn't come as much of a surprise, but somebody's lied to you.
Firing now. Alarm.
I've been looking for you, Space Marine. You got something of mine.
Why didn't it work?
Damn that Drogon! Never trust the Inquisition!
Stand fast, Ultramarines. We can handle a few orcs.
Space Marine! Was that supposed to hurt?
Demons! How is this possible?
You got new friends now, Space Marine!
So you fire the mega weapon, and it has no effect on the orcs. Then, a portal to hell opens and a bunch of demons start pouring out. It turns out the Inquisitor you saved was dead before you even met him. What you've actually been speaking with is a puppet controlled by the Chaos Lord, Nemeroth, and he was manipulating you from the start to open a tear into the warp. This would have been a good twist had they not put the demons on the cover art. The introduction of the Chaos Forces actually has some pretty significant gameplay shakeups. You can't wade into these guys with melee like you could the orcs. They have a lot more ranged units, and if you spend too much time exposed, they will drop you like a sack of wet shit. So I found myself taking cover a lot more and popping out to take out units at a range, and using my Fury meter whenever I was about to die. Chaos only have two different melee units, Screaming Demons and Mace-wielding Chaos Marine Giga Chads. One of my favorite story tropes in video games is when a secret third faction comes in at the final act that threatens both of the previously established factions. The scenarios you can create with three unique factions all fighting each other at the same time can be really interesting and varied. However, you only ever get to see the orcs and the forces of chaos fighting each other in a couple minutes worth of gameplay. I think it's a big missed opportunity here. You then need to shut down the Chaos Gate and kill Nemeroth. You have a boss fight with the War Boss, who is tragically underused in the story. The War Bosses in the 40k universe are always so fun, have such big personalities, and are always funny as hell. I guess they didn't want him stealing the show. You then confront Nemeroth in a final, climactic, QuickTime event. To be fair, there's a big arena shootout with his goon squad beforehand, but it was the early 2010s. Every game had to have a damn QuickTime event. After you've single-handedly cleaned up all the messes on Graia, Leandros snitches on you for opening the Chaos Gate, and the Inquisition comes to take you to Super Jail. I believe some people were pretty pissed off by this ending, but it's heavily foreshadowed from the beginning. Perhaps a little too much. Leandros questions everything Titus does throughout the game, and Titus doesn't help his case by encouraging Leandros to think outside the box. Thinking outside the box is not on the menu for a Space Marine, though. They are very inside-the-box thinkers. Titus seems like he forgot what universe he was in, because nerds like Leandros love snitching people out to the Inquisition. However, Leandros did just watch Titus disperse the orcs and shut down a Chaos Gate, so it seems like he was finding the quickest way to get a promotion. Either way, just because the ending was foreshadowed doesn't mean all parties involved weren't being incredibly stupid. And if you're wondering why I'm not bringing up Sidonis in any of this, it's because he died. Just a week out from retirement. So is Space Marine worth it today? Well, it's a fun weekend game and the whole campaign can be beaten in roughly 8 hours. The story is a fun, albeit linear time that manages to mix up its gameplay loop long enough to keep it engaging. While I wouldn't exactly call it replayable though, as there's no New Game Plus mechanics or anything like that, maybe only pick it up if you're a big Warhammer nerd. There is multiplayer also, but it's pretty dead nowadays. You can still get into the occasional match, but it's not what I would call thriving. I was very disappointed that I couldn't get into a match of Dreadnought Assault. I bet that was rad back in the day. There were going to be a couple of sequels after this, but they got cancelled whenever THQ shut its doors. I am very excited that Sega picked up the series to do a sequel, but considering we know basically nothing about it at this point, you can put me down as cautiously optimistic. Well, that is it for this episode. I would really like to thank all my new subscribers. I know the MechWarrior video has been doing pretty well. I actually had a script written to do a Kestrel Lancers review, but I really wasn't liking how it all turned out, so I decided to scrap that project, as I suspect that MechWarrior is going to be doing a clan invasion DLC at some point soon, so I think I'm just gonna wait and cover both of them in the same video. Anyways, why don't you drop me a like and a follow, and you'll catch me for whatever I decide to cover next. We'll see you later. Bye.